I wore shorts yesterday. What happened? I wore shorts after the hailstorm.
I found out after the hailstorm, the dandelions are much easier to pull up.
Oh, yeah.
What are easiest?
Laura,
now we're back
what did you
to
say, Laura?
I said after the hailstorm or the rain, the dandelions were much easier to pull
Oh.
up. And the root and all.
You did your hard work after the hailstorm. So, anyway, now we're back to pseudo-winter weather. Anyway, is it supposed to get warmer later in the week again, or anybody know?
Next weekend's gonna be kinda cool, about the 30s, I think.
But it's supposed to be warm the rest of the week.
The next
Oh, really?
weekend will be cool.
So it'll be cold during, I live in the industries, so I don't have a choice. I have to go to the St. Patrick's Day parade. But, so it'll be cold for that, so maybe that'll kind of calm people down.
I heard 60s and 70s for later.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That'll just be motivation to get more antifreeze.
That's right.
That never works out well.
What day is the 14th?
And also,
Boy Scout?
thank God for technology, because but for my iPhone, I would not have remembered to
Yeah.
make the time change.
There are a lot of people that just.
If you're an usher at any church, this is one of the most entertaining days of the year. Because you get to watch people, show up halfway through the sermon in the narthex, and they're like,
Yeah, exactly.
so, anyway.
Henry, Tommy Bosler is back with
Yes,
us
welcome
today.
back, Tommy, I saw you. I saw you walk in, good to have you again.
Oh, let me tell the class too, Ken's wife, Joyce, is going to join us at some point. She's very, very shy. To the point of she knows it's a problem, but she wants to come at some point. Ken's bought her a Bible, and she is going to join us at some time. But when she does, we're going to welcome her, but just, realize she's not going to say anything for a while, and that's fine. So
Ken so she's not gonna go with him?
she's
to
going to come,
Perennial?
Ken's trying to get her to come here. She wants her to come here first.
Ken's still around, he's just down
Yeah,
the hall.
yeah, he's in Perennial, yeah.
Perennial,
Yeah,
which
we-
is where
we-
I sneak off to
Yeah.
sometimes as well.
Not
He,
today, though, not today.
Yeah, no, not today. But he wanted to follow the study that they're doing of the Gospels there, which actually I'll mention in a little bit. So it is Lent, and we have artwork that you can experience as part of your Lenten experience. The theme is the grace of seeing, and these are short meditative films are available for viewing near McKeever Chapel, excuse me. And also, it looks like there are some prints in the south lobby. So, please go check those out. In a few weeks, well, let's see, when is March 22nd? Is that from tomorrow? No. What is today, the 10th? Yeah, so anyway, about a week and a half, you'll be getting an email. It's another survey. They call it an engagement survey. That's engagement as in participation, not as in pre-marriage. Anyway, just there'll be some questions on that, trying to gauge your amount of involvement, participation in the church. We did this a couple of years ago, along with the Gallup survey company. So they are reviving that, so be on the lookout for that. If you don't do internet, there are paper copies available in the church office that you can take the survey that way. What else did have? Still the Wednesday night classes, What Did Jesus Do? And Finding Fred.
But not this Wednesday.
Not this Wednesday because
Spring break.
spring break is this week, thank you, yes. Yeah, this week we do not have Wednesday activities, so.
Wednesday night. We do
Wednesday
night. Yeah.
Okay, we're still doing the noon lunch, okay. So, the Finding Fred is Fred Rogers. That's taught by Sean Ashmore, who is the director of the perennial class where Ken is currently going. That's a 4-week class on different themes from Mr. Rogers that,
Can I say
Christian
something?
themes. Yes, please.
Recently, we saw a documentary on Mr. Rogers. Did anybody else see it in here?
Yeah.
And I wish so much I could go to that, but it goes into,
It's choir time, right?
yes,
Yeah.
choir time. But I highly recommend for people to go to it. And I think it'd be real beneficial.
I was disappointed too because I can't go to it because I have other stuff Wednesday night. So he said he may try to do it later on this year. So probably if we email Mark Wingfield after he gets back from sabbatical and maybe beg him to set up another opportunity.
And
Twist
recommend
his arm to do it, yeah, because he said, I think there's a lot of people, probably everybody who works in the kids department would like to hear what he has to say, but we're all doing stuff on Wednesday nights, so.
And can I mention something else?
Yes.
How many of y'all get email from Bill Jones? Okay, now, I don't know if you read it all, I usually don't even look at it that much, but this week I did. And on March 20th, the new CBF, is he coordinator or director? What is-
Coordinator, yeah, I think coordinator.
Coordinator is coming through here. And he's going to be doing all these meals in 6 or 8 places in Texas. And he's gonna be at Wilshire, March 20th at 7:45 a.m. for breakfast meal. And it's a chance
Might
to
be there
get to,
alone.
no, I'm gonna go, and people that like to get up early will probably come too. But you have to make a reservation so they know how many to count on. You see, he's here at 7:45, at noon he's at Broadway Baptist Fort Worth. The next day, he's in Waco. He goes to San Antonio, he goes to South Main, Houston, and there's another stop before that. And so this is just a chance to get to know him. And he's traveling with 2 men. I recognize their names, but I can't tell you who they are, and I'm sure you've heard of them. But they're gonna be introducing him to people, and of course, the reason to come here is to meet George Mason, for sure, and some other people in this church. So think about it. It's March 20th, Wednesday, March, Wednesday, March 20th.
Week from
A
Wednesday.
week from Wednesday.
7:45.
And you just have to let them know in advance that you're coming.
I said our meals. are
And-
good.
What? Or you can go to Fort Worth, you go to a new one,
He's from Georgia, right?
He is from Georgia, yes, yes.
So, also don't forget, March 29th, March 30th, Faith in 3D, Pompeii, All Wilshire cast. That's coming up.
Thank you.
Should be a fun time.
What is it again, dessert, dialogue, and
Dessert, dialogue, no, drama, dessert, and dialogue.
drama, dessert?
Faith in 3D. I started the
It's
prayer
here.
book.
It's over here.
It's already over there. Okay, there we go. And I'm teaching today. So I gotta leave at 10:40, so Dennis will close out.
Henry, just for your benefit then, our teacher of next week, Jim Hancock, I saw him, he had heart surgery this week, and I saw him in the hospital, he's doing fine. He has 13 stents over his lifetime. He
Yes.
says he has 2 cardiologists, he has an electrician and a plumber. And this time, it was the electrician that he needed. It was not a stent, it was one they had done, but he was feeling great, and he sent out an email from, the day after, so
So he'll be here next week?
I think he will.
Oh my.
Yeah, he's gonna teach next week?
Yep, next 2 weeks.
Poor guy.
So what did they do this time?
It was some kind of, he told me, and I don't know the name of it, I thought his heart stopped beating in the middle of the night.
Ablation?
And so whatever it is, but
No, I
whatever they
think
put
they
in
put
there,
in
they had to
that,
put something in
yeah.
there.
Oh.
It wasn't a pacemaker, but it was something that helped.
Cardio version of shock.
Defibrillator?
Is that one? Yeah.
No, it wasn't even that. It was, I knew both of those words. It was
Oh.
something else, and he told me, and I went into one ear and out the other, but.
So
anyway.
was this scheduled, or this was something that came?
No, this is something he'd been planning since November.
His heart stopped.
Because it appeared suddenly on care notes.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it was a
yeah.
correction.
Well, he didn't know when it was gonna be, because he was waiting for
On
a
that
slot.
note,
so-
who's a nurse in here?
Yeah, that's
He knew
right.
it was gonna happen, but
He
he didn't.
observed his own heart stopping?
Apparently, he was not aware of it, but apparently they found it at an exam that, you know, that, I think he had to wear some monitor, he got very tired.
Mark, we'll bring the AED up here next time.
Yeah,
Right?
yes.
Handy, yeah.
Well, there are defibrillators on the hallways here, so, yeah. Anyway, so you wouldn't hear that, but I wanted you to hear that, so.
No, they're totally idiot proof, I promise you. They tell you step by step when you take them off the wall what to do.
So informative.
Yeah, so that's.
Good to know you read all the directions.
We all know.
I just finished my CPR, so.
Good, there you go, your street legal.
Mine's renewed.
Okay.
They really are.
Well, so the Lent has started now, and one thing I've noticed about our class schedule, we seem to dovetail pretty well with the Lenten season. That seems to happen every, well, I guess it's every 2 years. Because the Garden of Gethsemane story, you'll be hearing it a lot over the next 6 weeks. I think even if you go to the Good Friday service, they do it then too. Now, we don't dovetail so well for Christmas. We end up doing the Christmas stories in like September, I think. But the timing of this works out pretty well. So you'll be hearing this story a lot. So it's a good thing that we're studying it today. The Gethsemane story, it's in all four Gospels. In addition to, you know, the Last Supper and then the events leading up to his crucifixion and then his resurrection. All those themes and stories are in all four Gospels. Of course, each Gospel gives kind of a different take, paints a different portrait, so to say. And, you know, the Gospels, they all kind of complement each other, but I'm sort of learning the benefits of reading each Gospel separately. This is why I'm sneaking off down the hallways in Perennial. That's why I think that's sort of Ken's motivation too, for why he's there. They're doing this, what's the name of the book? 4 Gospels, 1 Jesus. I forgot the author's name. But it's where you go all the way through, where you kind of hit the highlights of each Gospel. So you can sort of focus on the themes and messages of each Gospel instead of sort of mixing them all together. I like the term portrait when talking about trying to describe how each Gospel works. So if you think of a portrait, think of a painter. Think of, what are the names like? Rembrandt, Monet, Van Gogh, and Picasso. Okay? And imagine, instead of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, think of those 4 painters. All right? And imagine them all painting Jesus. Okay? So if you're really going to appreciate what each painter is trying to say about Jesus, you really have to look at each painting separately. Because if you think about it, think how Rembrandt paints, Monet paints, Van Gogh, and Picasso. Now imagine all those just kind of, imagine a painting of Jesus and it's all just kind of jumbled up together. Okay? You end up, it can be confusing, and you end up sort of missing a lot of the themes and nuances of each one. This is what we do at Christmas with the manger scene, if you think about it. You know, we put the wise men and the shepherds and the baby Jesus and Joseph and Mary and all the sheep and all that all together in one. But really, that's sort of a hybrid of Matthew and Luke, and it's all sort of put together. And both Matthew and Luke have different things that they're trying to say about the birth of Jesus. And when we kind of put it all together like that, we can miss some of the themes. So I thought it would be good. We've got 3 different gospel passages on this. John has it too. John also covers the Garden of Gethsemane, although he doesn't talk about the prayer so much. It's just the part where Jesus is betrayed. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have this part about where Jesus prays and the disciples are not very supportive of it. And, but I thought, since we are this year in our lectionary doing just the Gospel of Luke, every year the lectionary chooses one of the three synoptic Gospels, and this year it's Luke. So I thought, let's just do that passage, and let's just focus on that one. As I said, Luke is one of the synoptic Gospels, along with Matthew and Mark. They share a lot of similarities. Synoptic means to see together. So they see Gethsemane and a lot of other stories in the Bible kind of the same way, although there are some differences. A few bits of background about Luke, just the Gospel of Luke in general. Most scholars think that Luke actually used Mark as a starting point. I know this is, for some of you all, this is a review. They also, scholars think the same thing about Matthew, that they had, both Matthew and Luke had Mark as a source in front of them when they were then writing out their Gospels, which would explain why there's a lot of similarity between the three. There's really no conclusive date on when Luke was written. Anywhere from the mid-60s to the early 80s in that first century. So roughly 30 to 50 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Some scholars, some people make the commentary or observation, and this is sort of subjective, but they think that in Luke's gospel, it seems like Luke sort of has a less raw version of Jesus. What do I mean by that? Well, Mark tends to make him seem very human and very susceptible to emotion. Luke, in some instances, although I don't think it happens so much in the Gethsemane story, but kind of shies away from that. One of the things that they say about Luke is that it has a lot of quotes or sayings of Jesus that they think comes from what is now an what am I trying to say? It's a source for which they call it Q, which is short for the German word Quelle, which means source. Anyway, this is a theory that some German scholars came up with several hundred years ago. They noticed a lot of similarities between Luke and Matthew regarding sayings of Jesus, teachings of Jesus. And they theorized that there must have been, like with Mark, Matthew and Luke might have also been using this other source. Mark is a very strong narrative, okay? It doesn't have Jesus, it has Jesus doing more doing than talking. Whereas this Q source is just almost purely Jesus talking and teaching. And so there's this theory that Luke, along with Matthew, took the action story of Mark and the teaching element of the Q source and blended it together. So you'll find a lot of that in Luke. They think that the author, Luke, was a Gentile. And interestingly enough, he is the only New Testament author of all the books in the New Testament. He's the only one who's not a Jew. And he was writing to a Gentile audience. He frequently omits any references to Jewish customs or descriptions.
He was a physician.
I'm sorry?
Luke?
He was a doctor. They think he was a doctor. And there are lots of, and you'll see it in this Garden of Gethsemane story, there are certain references that, or details that only a person with a medical background might pick up on or find some significance in.
We have to define medical.
Yeah.
On the basis of the age he lived in.
Yeah, it was not what we would.
He applied leeches.
Yes.
Yes.
Then there was copious bloodletting too. So not a fun.
There's an interesting, let's see, I wasn't gonna read this, but it has been said, I'm reading from William Barclay, who's a commentator, a Scottish New Testament scholar and professor, now deceased. He has very good commentaries that I rely on a lot. He had this great quote with respect to the fact that Luke might have been a doctor. It has been said that a minister sees men and women at their best, a lawyer sees them at their worst, and a doctor sees them as they are. Luke saw men and women and loved them all. So I thought that was interesting. He was a companion of Paul. Luke is mentioned in Colossians and Philemon and 2 Timothy. So he was a traveling companion that would have had the ability to gather a lot of information from direct sources, from direct witnesses. His readers, they were probably familiar with the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is called the Septuagint, which is Greek for the 70. I think the idea was that there were 70 scholars that sat down and took the Hebrew Bible and then translated it into Greek. And so Luke's readers would have been more familiar with that. And I think I'm going to get this right. I might be butchering this a little bit, but you ever notice how there are more books in the Catholic Bible than in the Protestant Bible? The reason for that, the simplified reason for that, and I might be oversimplifying this, but is that the Catholic Bible is derived from a Latin translation, the Vulgate, that was derived from a Greek translation that included the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Not only was it translated into Greek, it also was more expansive than the Hebrew version of what we now call the Old Testament. What do I mean by more expansive? It had more books. And so, through that process, you ended up with the Catholic Bible with more books in the Old Testament. Martin Luther comes along, Protestant Reformation, and says, you know what, you should have used the Hebrew version of the Old Testament as the source of translation, not the Greek version. Well, the Hebrew version had less books. So when the Protestants came up with their own translation, as I said, I'm greatly oversimplifying this, it ended up having fewer books. Interesting.
And how many more books does the Catholic have?
I forget.
Just the Maccabees.
Yeah, you think about the Tobit and the Maccabees and the, what is it called, the Book of Wisdom. I probably shouldn't have gone off on this tangent because I just can't speak that. I'm not that educated on it. But that's sort of my general impression about it. And that's when I always see the Septuagint and the Greek translation of the Old Testament. That's what it makes me think of. His writing style is, it would have been for readers that would have been educated but not highly educated. His target audience, Luke's target audience, was probably Gentiles who were attracted to the Jewish belief in one true God, and also as well as Jews that were living outside of Israel, that were also identified as followers of Jesus. And therefore, that's why they would have been reading the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Luke is known as the universal gospel, has this theme of, the gospel is for everyone. And if you think about the genealogy of Jesus that Luke lists, in Matthew, the genealogy goes back to Abraham, okay, the father of the nation of Israel. In Luke, the genealogy goes all the way back to Adam, the very first human being. So he links Jesus with everyone. So that's some background for Luke before we read. Let's go ahead and read. It's pretty short. about 15 verses. If someone could do Luke 39 through 46. And then
Luke chapter
someone-
22, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Luke chapter 22.
Page 858.
Yes, I did not, I forgot to write the page that there. Okay, yes, page 858 in the class in the Black Bible, NRSV. So 39 through 46, and then if someone else could read, finish out with 47 through 54.
I'll start.
Okay,
He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief, and he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial."
thank you.
While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man?" When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with a sword?" Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your power and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance.
Thank you. I forgot to give the more immediate background of the story, which I think I assume most people know, but, so they just finished with what we now know of as the Last Supper. And this occurs after that, and then prior to his trial and eventual crucifixion. So this is sort of the turning point of the story. So, notice how, where's the word Gethsemane in this story? In Luke's version.
Not there.
It's not there.
It's not in John either.
Right. He goes, I don't know what John's word for this is. It starts with a K. Luke's just calls the area the Mount of Olives. We've got 1, 2, how many people have been on the Israel trip? Diana, Carrie, just up to. So the first 2 times that this lesson was taught, it was taught by Bill Hollis, who also went on the Israel trip. And he showed all kinds of pictures of, because you go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he showed, you know, where it was, how it's located outside of the city. Why is Jesus going outside of the city for this time of prayer? Well, they couldn't really have gardens inside of Jerusalem. There wasn't enough room, overcrowding. And also, I think there was issue about, you know, with the gardening, that means that you have to use some type of fertilizer. And I think there was an issue about you couldn't have that on sacred soil. So anyway, lots of gardens outside of the city. And there were people, you had to be a person of means to have a garden. And there were people of means that were supporters and followers of Jesus. So he would have had access to this probably through one of his more wealthier, I was about to use the word patron, but that's probably not the right way to describe their relationship. Supporter, a wealthy supporter of Jesus. And Gethsemane actually can probably mean olive vat or olive press. So this was probably a garden where they grew olives. So why does Jesus go there? Oh, by the way, I forgot to say this at the beginning. Since I assume most of y'all are familiar with this, I tend to kind of handle this more as a discussion than a lecture. So I just kind of have a series of open-ended questions that I'll just ask, see what happens. So why is Jesus going out there? Oops.
Whoops.
I'm
One
gonna
went
take
down.
that as a sign.
Yes.
Just what it is.
It is a sign, yeah.
There's a sign on the floor.
Yeah.
Gethsemane is a probably story of Jesus' life that faces trial in his own life. And many of us here go through Gethsemane in our own life. Believe me, we do. And Vicky and you go through right this moment. And many of us go through our own trial, tribulation of Gethsemane in our own life. So there's four gospel. We have Luke writing about story of Jesus. And all of you, me, writing our own testimony, how we deal with God in this moment. You know, that's so important, because Jesus set a very good example. When trial come to him, he goes somewhere, do what? Pray. That's an example.
Robert, I think I'm done with the lesson. Thank you, Robert.
Henry, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
My phone doesn't have the commentary on this as well, but I've got brackets around verses 43 through 44. Was that added later? What is?
Yeah, I think I had read somewhere that was added later. You're talking about the angel appearing in.
Yes.
This book says other ancient authorities lack verses 43 and 44.
Yeah, I thought I didn't make notes on that, but I thought I remembered hearing that maybe the earlier versions of Luke might not have included that. And that is only in Luke. It doesn't show up in Matthew or Mark. This talk of the description of the angel and the physical description of what happens to him while he's in anguish. So I think that's the reason. Well, Travis just found the reason. But let's go back. Why doesn't Jesus go out there by himself? Why does he seek companionship? Robert kind of already hit on this. I mean, during your time of grief and suffering,
You need people.
you need people.
Except that he separates himself from them.
Yeah, but yeah, so it's sort of one of those, I mean, we could all relate to this. You need people around, but you need time to yourself as well.
You need them around, but you want them over there.
Yes, but then you want to have easy access to go back. But yet we have this situation here where he's God and he's man, and human, excuse me. And you see this side of his human nature where he needs this companionship. He wants them to be with him. So I think the idea is that all the disciples go with him, but who ends up being with him in kind of in the closer, who are the three disciples that are with him? Yeah, Peter, James, and John. And where have we seen them all, this group together before?
Mount of Transfiguration.
Transfiguration, which I think, was it last Sunday or the Sunday before?
Last
Last Sunday, okay. So kind of an interesting parallel there. They're with him in the high points and they're with him in the low points. What does this mean? Pray that you may not come into the time of trial. He says it to the disciples twice, doesn't he? He says it when they first arrive.
I don't come into temptation. Don't come into, the trial be like our into temptation.
Right, now this one our New Revised Standard Version translates it as the time of trial, I
And
believe,
then
right?
it's been translated as, you will not fall into temptation.
Yeah, I've seen it that way too, not fall into temptation.
But it's also suffering, and he knew he was gonna suffer a lot. He also knew how they were gonna die, too. I mean, he knew that. You know? so-
He also knew, well, first of all, let me step back a little bit. Luke, this is another common theme in the Gospel of Luke, a common occurrence. He likes prayer. I mean, he likes to show people praying. He shows Jesus praying all the time prior to important events. Before his baptism, a lot of times before he confronts the religious authorities, before he chooses the disciples, before the transfiguration, even up to the point when he's on the cross. And even now, you see Jesus going to God in prayer. So, and as Robert said, that's part of what this story's about, is showing the importance of that process and the need for Jesus to do that and the need for us to do that.
Henry, I think except for the cross, that every place he prayed, he was always, as he told us to pray, it was in private, not on the street corner and bragging or whatever, but every place he prayed were pretty much a private area. I mean, that's another, when you said, why did he pray in the Garden of Gethsemane, I mean, in the Mount of Olives, out of town? Well, that was kind of out of town. It was away from everybody, so.
Something that was done on an internal
Yeah.
level, not done for show.
Not for show, yeah.
And
It's also known in that a little bit as the power of darkness coming upon him. And he could not wish that on me.
Well, he knew that Peter and the others would eventually face their time of trial. In fact, in Luke, and I think it's only in Luke, immediately prior to this passage here, he prays specifically, or mentions to Peter that he is praying for him because he knows that Peter's going to be facing upcoming trials. But he didn't want the disciples to get caught right then and there. You know, he doesn't want them to be facing the trial that he's immediately going to have to face. He wants them to survive and persist so that they can then spread the message. So you can kind of read that meaning into it too, also when he says, you know, pray that you don't face the time of trial.
overall, the whole Garden of Gethsemane thing is hugely illustrative of his human side.
Yes.
Because the very idea that Jesus would say, can this cup be passed from me? You know, ask that, if it could be, and believe it would happen, but he knows good and well it can.
So that quote right there, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. If you are willing.
If it be your will,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
other words.
God, I'm asking you, I don't know, but if you are willing, remove this cup from me. So does that mean that Jesus had doubts? If Jesus is God, how can God have doubts? Open-ended question, like I said.
I think as
I think
man,
it's also
as,
man. Yeah.
you know, as human, he knew the kind of pain it would be
Uh-huh.
and humiliation. And he just, you know, if there's any way I can get out of this, haven't you kind of wanted to do that? If there's any way I can get out of this?
Jesus, in and of himself, is a huge example to all the rest of us Christians. And this is just one respect, how he's an example. Because he prays this prayer. If he prays this prayer, why don't we?
Mm-hmm. You're saying exactly what Robert said.
We get glimpses in places in the Bible where Jesus doesn't know everything. And he relies on prayer and his relationship with the Father. I guess to fill in the blanks, that's a crude way of saying it, probably not exactly accurate, but there are places, I'm struggling to think of a specific example, but there's another place in the Bible where he says, I don't know the day or the hour of, one of you may remember this,
Yeah, I think that's in the,
But,
like,
but my
Matthew.
Father in heaven knows.
Yeah,
And so there are places where we get an idea that he is subject to, if not the same kind of veil of lack of knowledge of the future that we are, then something somewhat akin to it.
He is fully human.
And the
And humans
humanity,
have doubts.
This translation says, but this is your hour when darkness reigns.
at the, you're talking about the very end when he's
Yeah.
talking to his, when he's talking to the crowd, yes. I wrote this question down, I asked it 2 years ago. Is Jesus the Son of God because he knew all the answers? Or is he the Son of God because he knew how to live through the questions? Which I think is what you're speaking to.
I'll take credit for that. That's a bigger point than I was making, but sure.
Sounds good, doesn't
I
it?
think he knew everything, it's just that he was very apprehensive about certain parts.
But wouldn't that apprehension suggest doubt?
Yeah, and also suggests he's a human.
That's what I was gonna say, he was human.
And because he knew everything and he knew the extent of the suffering
There
he's
you
gonna
go.
have to go through.
Well, this cross, you know, putting people on a cross was a common practice, so if, I mean, you know what's involved in that, and his was so much more severe
Mhm.
supposedly than the common man.
But he
citizen,
didn't
you
run
know.
from it.
Yeah.
He is also not only physical suffering, but there was some point where he atoned for our sins.
So he
And
took on all our
he
sins.
took on all our sins,
If you can
and
imagine.
apparently he felt like God left him.
And separated from him.
And that'd just be the awfulest thing you can think of.
Every sin that had been committed and will be committed, every one.
So the description of his sweating blood, I think kind of dovetails sort of with what we're talking about here. It also shows, I mean, you can, there is a medical condition where that, in certain circumstances, that can happen.
Capillary fragility.
Yeah. So was Luke actually trying to describe, you know, that particular medical condition, or was Luke just trying to say he was enormously stressed?
Intense.
Yeah, does it
Because it
Does it
says
really
life.
matter? Yeah.
It says life.
Yeah, yeah.
That was and I had never picked up on the word like being,
Well,
it jumped out at me.
Yeah, I mean, you can read it either way, and I think either way is, so, I mean, the point that Luke is trying to make is that he is stressed. The word, let's see, I think in this translation it's anguish. What does it say? Then, in his anguish he prayed more earnestly. I think some translations say agony. And I think the original Greek word is one that is used to describe someone struggling with just raw fear. So,
And
you
then
know,
an angel from heaven appeared.
Luke likes angels. The angel is not in Matthew or Mark, but it does appear here. And think about the angel appearing to, let's see, I wrote it down.
Elizabeth, Mary,
Yeah, I mean, he appears to Mary, he appears to
Joseph?
Father John the Baptist.
Zechariah.
Zechariah,
Oh, Father, face of mother.
appears to the shepherds in the field, okay? So, you know, again, Luke's trying to get across the point that God is with him, God is interacting with him, God is still providing the providential guidance during this time.
Henry, this is one of the only places I remember in the Bible that the person that, where the angel appeared, they were told not to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
This is not there.
Oh, you're right. Yeah,
Yeah, it
That's
normally says,
interesting.
do not be afraid.
Right.
yeah. It's very interesting
Yeah.
about that. You're right.
Our discussion about Jesus experiencing fear and Jesus experiencing doubts, made me think about this quote from Paul in his letter to the Philippians. And he's counseling them to be like Christ, but then he goes on further to describe the nature of Christ. Christ Jesus, who, this is Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8. Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness. And being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So it doesn't really answer the question or resolve the paradox of how can God feel fear or experience doubt, but it addresses it, and it, I guess, sort of embraces the mystery of it. It's one of those strange. I mean, I don't have a hard time accepting it. Maybe it's because I've heard the story so much. But the more you hear it, the more it and I guess if the point is that God understands us at such a basic, raw level, then of course God would have to go through this and experience this in order to reach us, in order to love us. I'm going off script here. I'm just throwing that out and seeing anything. But I think I'm kind of echoing what a lot of you all have already said.
Sometime in your life, go through trial or tribulation. Sometimes you might share with your very, very good friend and your own pastor, but more important than anything is you alone with God. That's the reality here. That's what the Bible said right here. And yes, Jesus was among all his disciples. They understand him, they eat with him, all of that good stuff. But when he faced the trial, some degree of uncertainty, he went out by himself. This is the story of our life. Many of you happily married. Believe me, sometimes when you alone facing a trial, your husband or your wife may not can understand, but God can. Believe me, that's how that is in life. Sometimes we in life, we have our moment of Gethsemane. We alone with God and pray as hard as we can. That's what the Bible says. Pray as hard as I can. Until he prays through already. You know what I mean? Show a sign of he come out of it, okay. And how sometimes we do that ourselves. To pray, not even tell your husband or your wife, just pray about it. And let God, the God you've been trusted for over all your life, let him take care of this situation for you. Believe me. You know, sometimes it might not work, right? I mean, we just have to believe him.
You know, when Jesus finishes with his prayer ritual, and Luke, it only describes one cycle of this. You know, he prays, and then he comes back and finds the disciples asleep. Matthew and Mark have it happening 3 times. But regardless of whether it was 1 or it was 3, when he's finished, and then he notices his accusers coming, there's a certain type of resolve that he has that he might have been lacking prior to this time of prayer. But yet he seems to have this resolve afterward. And I find it interesting, his reaction to his accusers. It's a little different in Matthew and Mark. But I mean, he has a reaction to Judas, and he has a reaction to he has a reaction to the disciples' reaction to the crowd. And he does have some word for the crowd too. Judas, he's very direct with, actually more so than in Matthew. You know, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man? He pretty much just calls Judas out. As he does also with the crowd. Have you come with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit? Was I with you the day after day in the temple, and you did not lay hands on me? You guys saw me every day in broad daylight. But now you decide to make your move? Almost as is to say, okay, even you guys know, I mean, your actions show that even you know you can't, you're doing something underhanded here. But what I find very interesting about his reaction after the prayer and this kind of calm resolve that he has, how does he react when the disciples tried to do violence against the crowd?
He told them to stop.
Yeah, no more of this. But then, Matthew and Mark just have him saying, don't do that. But Luke has him take one further step.
He healed him.
He heals him.
And would you not stop what you were doing and think, I just saw this? Doesn't this mean more than what we were told? You know?
Uh-huh. What is this is an interesting question what is more significant? What's Jesus' more significant act in that moment? Is it the healing that is described, or is it the fact that he's helping his enemy? I mean, think about it. We often, focus on oh wow, he healed somebody instantly. But the message to that also is that he is showing the disciples this way forward of nonviolence he is living out what he's already been preaching to them before,
It's the golden rule, basically.
I'm sorry?
It's a golden rule. Like,
Yeah.
this is what,
Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes I think we can get so caught up in we read parts of the Bible where it seems like the laws of nature have been bent or broken, and we get so focused on, was Jesus some master magician? And I'm not saying that he wasn't, but I think if we get so focused on that, we kind of overlook there's always a reason for the actions that he was doing. What was his reason for doing that? It was to show this type of forgiveness. So.
And also, the guy that did it is a terrible shot. I mean, how do you call somebody here?
Well, in other Gospels, John has Peter is the one who's actually wielding the sword. But in none of the synoptic Gospels is it actually identified who drew the sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. So, as I said, Robert pretty much gave away the surprise ending to my lesson. But I wanted to read this. Let's return back to, what is the significance of the meaning behind when Jesus finally says, yet not my will, but yours be done. And what's he doing? He's submitting to the will of God. There are a lot of different concepts floating around at the time about what a Messiah was. was supposed to be. Was it supposed to be a political leader or a military leader? Usually those were more favored presumptions. But there also were other Old Testament passages that talked about a suffering servant and about description of associating the Son of Man with this suffering servant, and that eventually the Son of Man would be vindicated. So it can be argued that, you know, Jesus is, when he's saying, not my will, but yours be done, is that he is now coming to terms with that is God's will, that is God's way of redemption, it's through that suffering servant way.
You know, with all his prayers, the three times that he went back and prayed, he probably didn't get any word from God that this was gonna be taken away. I mean, if there was communication really from God to him, you know, and so he had to resign to that, maybe.
Yeah, I think he realized it was a futile prayer.
Yeah.
So Robert said it today. We had a class member from a couple of years ago that said it, and I wrote it down. You know, we all must face our own Gethsemane. It's Squire Webb who said it before. And
You may face it more than once.
yeah, and when you face it, you can turn to this passage because Jesus shows you how to face it. Again, I'll
Once
close
again,
with
Jesus as an example.
I'm sorry?
Once again, Jesus as an example.
Right, as the example.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'll close with a comment from, again, William Barclay, which I thought was right on point. And right, I mean, just pretty much echoes what all of y'all have been saying. So in Luke, you know, Jesus says, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." It makes all the difference what tone of voice is used when saying, "Your will be done." Number one, it may be said in a tone of helpless submission, as by one who is in the grip of a power against which it is hopeless to fight. The words may be the death knell of hope. Number two, it may be said as by one who has been battered into submission. The words may be the admission of complete defeat. Number three, it may be said as by one who has been utterly frustrated and who sees that the dream can never come true. The words may be of those of a bleak regret or even of a bitter anger, which is all the more bitter because nothing can be done about it. Or, number four, it may be said with the accent of perfect trust. That is how Jesus said it. He was speaking to one who was Father. He was speaking to a God whose everlasting arms were underneath and about him, even on the cross. He was submitting, but he was submitting to the love that would never let him go. Life's hardest task is to accept what we cannot understand. But we can do even that if we are sure enough of the love of God.
Amen. Good.
Thank you, Henry.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank y'all. Now I have a date with a bunch of 4-year-olds.
Well, that will be a lesson for you.
That's why I get sitting.
Yeah, it will.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate that. Okay, our prayer request, we only have one on here for Jim Hancock. Were there any other prayer requests that we need to add? Yes, Deborah.
Yes, I have a cousin who was last evening diagnosed with renal failure and needs lots of prayers because she doesn't want to do the treatments or have the treatments done. And she's
She on a kidney transplant list?
No, not yet. We're trying to talk her into all of that. She's only 66, but she
What's her
doesn't-
name?
Her name's Barbara Shaw. I don't know, you guys may have heard of last week when there was a lady who, she and her brother were killed by the lady's son. I grew up with this lady and her son.